It was the first night of Shell, and Hope breathed a sigh of relief. The talk with Liam hadn't gone as well as she'd hoped, but neither had it been as bad as she'd feared. If only she could give him just an ounce more caution, just a tiny fraction more restraint. She lived by those watchwords for so long that they were second nature to her life here on Shell. Maybe that was the problem. She'd hidden herself away, disguised in caution and restraint when she arrived. Liam didn't feel the trepidation about the Shell that had haunted, even hunted, Hope. The memory of her early weeks and months here at Swago, she could still remember the fear and the nightmares. It was there like a candle in the back of her mind, and oh, how hard it had been to put that candle out. She thought of Randy. What would they have been like, together at the same age? The thought made her snort back a laugh. God, what a mess those two would have made. But that wasn't a fair comparison. Even Randy had his scars. Was there anyone who lived through the invasion that didn't? She doubted it, but there was a time for letting go. Liam had listened to her concerns with as much deference as he was able. That was probably saying more about her than him, but he'd done his best and only interrupted twice. Maybe there's something to this family matriarch thing after all. In the end, she finally relented, stated her terms. At least 6 dates before they started talking about plans. All the rest. Liam had leapt up from the chair and given her a huge hug before bounding out of the room. Off to call Belder, no doubt. And he'd probably have to explain that they couldn't talk about making plans, which was, in its way, making plans. 4 more dates. She could survive that, and let the future take care of itself. Probably. Hope found herself wondering how her new family was doing. She missed them terribly, but some trips just couldn't be avoided. But neither could some duties, like her work at the school. Hopefully they'd be back soon. She'd grown to rely on the support, and right now she really could use someone other than Liam giving her feedback. They also better bring her some chocolate. She'd earned it, by God. With a hoot of triumph, Clip's Cos Ring gloated over the lead. The clue arrived by sorting through one of the students' social media pages. After tossing out a few dozen twits discussing his marriage class, she'd narrowed her search down to several girls regularly discussing Warwick, probable students in his class. Clips flagged them for reading whenever they posted. While the thoughts and feelings of a gaggle of 12-somethings turned annoying after the 3rd day, Clips doggedly refused to give it up as a waste of time. The Academy girls were, well, some of the posts got decidedly odd. Still, it didn't take much of Clips's time to skim through them, either. Now, her conviction paid off with a post yammering about some stupid student show, how her human professor loved music, and that he was going to see a Cliff Singer concert that weekend. That little gem gave Clips everything she needed. A fevered 3-minute search later, and she knew exactly when and where Warwick would be. Suddenly fighting for time and hot on the trail, she only had 3 hours to get out to the concert venue and slip in as part of the press. Clips still had barely been home, and while the shower was badly needed, inspecting herself in the mirror gave an unhealthy appreciation of just how far the rash had progressed. Spreading down one perspiration-drenched arm, the florid chemical satchel of Ubeki Colada was clearly the culprit for the vividly bluish-yellow welts running down her torso to her hip. The maddening discomfort had been put at bay by the bottle of Pectramol Clips had picked up at a chemist, who swore that it was good for everything from insect bites to Corva's disease, whatever that was, and while it seemed to have spread rapidly, she had to admit the itch had been banished by a warm, numb sensation. Not having done laundry in a week, she'd thrown her clothes back on and set the car to autopilot, broken only to pull over and gorge herself on a premature celebratory feast of 3 chipped flarma sandwiches with extra gravy and a bag of bagoong puffs. At no point did Clips consider her desultory scratching might be spreading the rash, as she fingered the remaining scented sachets of Ubeki Colada as a vital part of her backup gear. To relieve the tedium of the drive, she messaged her editor and looked over the latest drafts of her side work. Clips had no illusions about the loathsome stature of her chosen profession as a freelance telejournalist. It might pay handsomely, but she understood that stalking people for a living was not highly regarded. Any lingering illusions were dispelled 2 years ago, when she tried tracking down a high priestess rumoured to be slipping out to sleep with a church secretary. Having gotten a hot tip about the corrupted cleric's whereabouts at a local temple, Clips has spent 2 hours hanging precariously in the lower branch of a Wumarunda tree, poised to get some video of the passionate prelate and her toy boy. In the end, she failed to put in an appearance, but 2 passing monks spotted her, and one paused in his rounds, long enough to give her the fingers. The exhausting effort of getting her bulk up the tree had been compounded by hours of nearly falling out of it, and while being flipped off by a monk wasn't enough to make Clips ponder her life choices, she had to admit she wasn't getting any younger. Usually finding herself with countless empty hours whilst taking out the famous and the scumballs of the capital, Clips arrived at the unlikely choice of writing children's stories. Her first offering, Penga Mesaf and the Curious Clue Crew, needed little more than repackaging some of her more successful escapades, painted over in the guise of an enterprising girl photographer and her friend solving mysteries, along with a Rakiri no one could understand thrown in for comedic relief. As literature, it had no redeeming value, but as long as the brats got a laugh, Clips figured it was an easy sale. Truthfully, she hated children, but the incident with the monks had left her oddly introspective. The royalty money on each book published wasn't much, but it built up, and the extra cash would roll in as long as she had a pulse. After parking her car in the outside lot to save some credits, things began to go wrong. Clips had arrived in plenty of time before the concert, and tried brushing the sandwich grease off inside the pockets of her slacks, before grabbing her video rig and huffing up to the entry with the grace of a quadriplegic Turox. Despite having showered, or perhaps because of it, Clips was aware her clothes were somewhat pungent, and as an afterthought she secreted 4 of the Ubeki-scented air fresheners about her person. By the time she managed to climb the lengthy stairs to the entry, she'd worked herself into a cold sweat and smelled vaguely like an overripe orchard. Also, the itch had started again. Unfortunately, when she bustled up to the ticket counter and waved her press badge, the gate guard wasn't having any of it. "For the 3rd time, no ticket, no entry, ma'am," the gate guard said. "You're not properly dressed, anyway." "Didn't you look at the badge? I'm with the press, damn it," Clips protested. "I'm working for Imperial Fair to do a story on the Diva. I don't need to get backstage. I just want to slip in and see how she works the crowd." "Yeah, I saw it," the guard nodded. She was pushing 8 feet tall, and it had been years since Clips had actually seen anyone in livery. It made her uncomfortable, and acutely aware of the seeds from the sandwich bun stuck in her teeth. "But I'm not seeing Imperial Fair. The way you look, Spank and Tickle Monthly would be a reach." Clips tried to puff up her chest, but while it redistributed her gut somewhat, the effect failed to make the daunting impression she'd hoped for. She pressed on gamely, regardless. "That's an insult. Everyone knows Dendry hasn't performed in almost 2 years. The press has a right to..." "Dendry's press coverage is being handled by her own people, so you're fresh out of luck." The woman's nose wrinkled. "Not that fresh really covers you. Goddess, you stink like a dead reeks." A hand flashed out and snagged the press badge deftly from the tenuous grasp of Clips's greasy fingers. "Oh, and your badge expired over a year ago. Now get the fuck out of here." Clips wanted to argue, but the extra foot of height and muscle on the guard told her to stay in her lane. Sulking over the lost press badge, she kicked at the curbs as car after car poured into the theatre's inner parking lot, discharging their passengers safely out of public view. The sound of trade shill, or Vatiker, was described as sounding like the bastard child of Russian and German. Much like bastard children, the Russians claimed it sounded more like German, while the Germans claimed the opposite. Neither side had a sense of humor about it. In his seat, just below the crest of the cliff, Tom pondered the role of Heishilvanti. Unlike trade shill, Heishilvanti was a flowing language that ran up and down the scale easily, but it was demanding on the ear, somehow. The language didn't seem to be consistently used by anyone except the priestesses, who spoke it in their litanies. The shill worked diligently to preserve it all the same. There was even a word of the day in every evening's newscast, just to keep it alive. Who knew the shill was secretly French? Regardless, while trade shill wasn't the most melodious language, he'd been actively speaking it for months now, and utterly immersed, it was nearly second nature to think in it. English was becoming something for listening to music, or watching an old movie with Miv, but High Shill was foreign territory to his ear. It didn't really matter. Tonight was an evening out with Miver and Shalia, making this a second date. Beyond that, Ganya had stressed it was a good opportunity for Miv to mingle and be seen. Hopefully, it could open doors for her career. That made it extra important, and he'd dressed for the occasion, even if he'd balked at makeup or chop-ins. Any of the elite 12 cliff singers gave performances infrequently, at best, and it seemed Dendra was something special. Not only did she sing in both high shill, her songs lapsed frequently into the trade shill that was the language of the people. It made her work tremendously popular, even if she wasn't esteemed by her peers, who sang exclusively in high shill and considered the break from tradition something unsavory. The amphitheatre itself was conservative, yet stunning by virtue of its raw presence. It felt like an inversion of the theatre of Dionysus in Athens, and Tom took a moment to ponder the comparison. A lifetime ago, he'd been an exchange student in Greece. One chill November evening, he leaped at the chance to see a classical play in the ancient theatre. There, just under the mount of the Acropolis, he'd watched as the ruins came alive, and performers took to a stage over 2 millennia old. It had been a special evening, though by the second act his butt had been frozen, and his back screamed bloody murder from the unforgiving limestone seats. The cliff summit was nothing more than the level slab of pavement, and while updates had probably been made and the pavement repaired every so often, performances had been held in this spot for at least 5,000 Earth years. Thankfully, the seating wasn't that old, and as he sank into the chair's form-fitting cushions, his back gave grateful thanks to the goddess. Drafel, apparently, who served as the theatre's patron. With Miver to his left and Shalia on his right, it certainly felt like an occasion. Even if he couldn't appreciate the performance, the ladies on either side of him were lovely. Miv wore a gown in flowing dark green and gold that marked her house colours, with a sigil along her lapel, and bracelets of gold and emerald on either wrist. The short bolero jacket she liked to wear was providing warmth against the chill of the night, with its internal heating elements. The boxy shoulders gave her just enough of a militant look to carry herself in the crowd as she mingled with other women who wore the faux armour of veterans, or at least aped the style. Shalia's outfit managed to artfully contrast yet complement Miv's, with sage and rose artfully blending as the eye moved down her slender body. The dress wrapped about her snugly, with ties at the wrists and elbows, and Tom wondered if it had been a gift. While subtle and unassuming, it suited her perfectly. She wore less jewellery, opting only for a pendant tonight, as well as the Pelavon sigil. Tom wondered again if that was some concession to her past, her role as the junior wife, or some other alien nod to tradition he didn't yet comprehend. He certainly had two of the most beautiful women he'd ever known on his arms, as they chatted about the performance to come, which briefly made Tom guilty. The lights came up on the summit to dimly reveal one of the most stunning women he'd ever seen. Dendra was easily over 7 feet tall, yet unlike many Shill women, she moved with a surpassing grace. Slim, almost Sylvian in appearance, the effect was enhanced by her dress of midnight blue. Long ebon hair flowed down past her knees, and her movements seemed ethereal as she blended into the embers of the twilight sky. Leah had mentioned Dendra trained since she was 3 Shill years old, and her talent showed. Not a motion was wasted as she took to the stage, every gesture subtle and flowing as she acknowledged the audience. So, this was a cliff singer. Tom knew dedication like this was something at a whole other level, but even so, he felt a brief stab of disloyalty to Miv and Leah. Damn. It was going to be a good evening. Even if High Shill sounded like a canary playing the bagpipes, the setting alone was memorable. He looked up as the first notes arose from the orchestra, rolling over the audience yet almost invisible beneath the power of the diva's voice. Jangan kan bia, hilang semuanya, telah diberi. Jangan kau pergi, rasa manusiawi, dan liru diri. Biar bumi tetap bersinar di bawah mentari. Tom briefly felt his jaw fall open. Dendra's voice was low and full as any Shilvanti woman, yet it was easy, melodic, and sensual as it ran up and down the scale of High Shill. He was rapt with attention, even if he couldn't understand a word. As the music rose again, Dendra's voice met it like the swell of the ocean, as the lyrics shifted easily into Vatica. Let there be joy and harmony from the roof of sky above to the deep blue sea. All that we have under the sun, singing loud in unheard sound, telling us that we are one. Tom looked around the crowd and waved again to Miv and Leah from across the room. The after-concert party was small, but the cream of the audience was there, and he revised his notions of just how much Paul Garnier had to get those tickets. Miv was bumping fists with some heavy nobility, while Shalea was playing the supporting role of second wife with ease. But after the third time he'd felt a hand run over his ass, Tom excused himself politely. Professor Bergress might have called him out for not being a supportive partner, but more than a few males had secluded themselves away on the far side of the room already. Tom hesitated after taking a longer look. Burdin would have felt right at home, but that just wasn't going to be an improvement. As Tom saw a few curious glances his way, he steered himself off towards another corner, where a group of girls about the age of his students were congregating around a lone Shilvanti boy, and although he didn't seem to be in distress, there was a look about him that screamed polite disinterest. He could work with that. Tom stepped close and listened in, and while one of the girls went on about the size of her mother's portfolio, he managed to catch the boy's eye. Probably no older than 19 Earth years old, Tom pressed in past one of the other girls and nodded, amiably. Quite a show, wasn't it? Shilvanti manners with boys sometimes had his uses. Portfolio girl gave him a look like he'd stepped on the family pet, but none of the girls dared to interrupt as the boy stepped over, looking fascinated. You speak Vatica? Just that, yes. I'm afraid that I don't understand a word of High Shilvanti, but it wasn't the problem I thought it would be. Tom nodded, affably. My name's Tom. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Arkuruni. The little male shill was dressed in a flowing white tunic that looked more at home with a priest's robes than the dress outfits all around them. You can call me Arku for short, Mr. Tom. Just Tom. Arku, eh? Like Samurai Jack? I'm sorry? Ah, no, I'm sorry. Tom sighed at his gaffe, and suddenly feeling like he needed to get out more. I'm a teacher, you see, and I've been giving my students some videos from back home. It was a reference they get, but it doesn't exactly translate. Oh, I've never met a human before. I had no idea any of your people were living on Chill. Arku looked at him earnestly, even as he slipped away from Portfolio Girl, to her silent consternation. You enjoyed the concert? Stunning, he nodded. Though I have a lot of questions. Oh, that makes sense, I suppose. Arku almost looked disappointed. What did you want to know? Sorry, did I say something wrong? Tom felt like he'd stepped in it somehow. My apologies, I shouldn't have interrupted your time with these young ladies. It's been a No, not at all. Arku stepped forward and offered his fist, unconsciously tugging at the collar of his tunic. It's just that I get asked so often. I didn't realize. You really must not know anything about the art. Please, ask me anything you want to know. Well, sure. Oh, but hey, my glass is almost empty. Tom looked at his drink reflexively. Would you mind if I pry you away from these young ladies long enough for me to freshen it up? Oh, that is... Arku didn't miss a beat, as he turned like a dancer and bowed to the gaggle. Ladies, please excuse me. I vow by my ancestors to return as soon as I'm able, but my mistress would never excuse me if I were inhospitable to someone seeing the art for the first time. I'm sure you understand. Tom was going to start toward the bar, but Arku seemed 3 steps ahead of him, slipping past so gracefully that Tom wasn't even sure how it had happened. With a nod and a smile to the flummoxed girls, he was off, trailing after the little shill. The bartender was one of 3 around the room, but while conversation ebbed and flowed in a choreographed dance of bumping fists and networking, the bar itself seemed empty. The little fellow stood up as Arku and Tom made it over, and Tom nodded to him as he reached Arku's side. Sorry about that. Or should I be? He asked. You looked a little concerned, but I really did want to ask you a few questions if it's all the same. Of course. Please. And you're right. Arku dipped his head, gracefully gesturing behind him without looking back. I think half of them want to sneak me away from the conservatory for a night, and the other half are sizing up their chances to be my second wife. Tom floundered for a moment. Second wife? You don't look like you're... What? I'm 12. Arku tugged reflexively at his tunic. Is that a problem? No. Actually, given a problem I've been having, it's kind of an advantage, if you don't mind my asking you something personal. My life is very private, but I'll answer if I can. The marriage was arranged by my father with the best interests in my career, you know, but it won't be official for another few years. No, I didn't. Tom flailed a bit. Look, pretend I don't understand anything, and we start over? All right. Aku looked thoughtful, but another glance towards the girl seemed to settle any lingering doubts. You see the tunic I'm wearing? This shows I'm an initiate singer, one of the 12 disciples training under my mistress, though only one of us will assume her title as cliff singer someday. That's why I thought you were asking me. Everyone does. You're a student of Dendro? Tom blurted. Damnation, that's impressive. No, Aku looked up at him flustered and nodded to the little fellow behind the bar. Water for me, please. As the waiter slipped off to the side, Aku moved in closer and whispered, I'm a student of Mistress Trangia. If she knew I was at Mistress Dendro's performance, she'd have me practicing scales for a week. Oh. I've been told there was no love lost over her style, but a week? In a closet, Aku said miserably, if I'm lucky. Look, please forget I said anything. The mistress already seems to think I'm useless. She says a 4-octave range isn't enough when I don't have perfect pitch, and she hates that I have a tiny burr in my voice. You can't really hear it. 4 octaves? Damn, you could give Freddie Mercury a run with a voice like that, Tom chuckled, but saw Aku's confusion. He was a famous human singer. Not traditional music at all, but rock is very popular in my world. Popular Stones? Aku looked mystified but interested. Rock is a genre. Tom felt around for his omnipad before fishing it out of his suit. It felt ridiculous to have pockets you could use as a purse. I keep a lot of my music in my omnipad. Some of my students are in our academy orchestra or the choir, and they like when I bring them something new. And you have some of Freddie's rocks? Is it anything like grunge music I've read about? Aku asked. It was a testament to regularly handling a room full of teenage girls that Tom didn't even blink. Rock Music by Freddie Mercury, he said slowly as he pulled up files. Here, I think the Platinum Collection covers it. I have about 6 or 7 albums at home, but this is a decent compilation. I can transfer it to your Omnipad if you like. Thank you, Tom. This is very kind of you, Aku said politely, as Tom swiped the file over. I'll be happy to listen to it sometime. I hope you enjoy it. The lyrics won't mean a thing if you don't speak English, but this has the video files too. He was a phenomenal stage performer. Aku looked at the file on his Omnipad as the song titles popped up in Shill on his screen, before slipping it into his tunic. You said there was something else? Please, if I can be of some help to you in return for the gift. It's just files. But actually... Tom looked over at the bar as the waiter returned and canted his head. That bottle? The glowing one on the lower right? The little shill turned and pulled it out obligingly. Really? Not many people have a taste for amber battle glory, sir. It's Tom, and I wondered if that's what it was. A friend at another bar got me interested, but I've never had any. I'm not surprised, Tom. It's really hard to get a bottle that isn't from one of the knockoff distilleries. I'm Gelsha, by the way, and this is the pure quill. The bartender smiled and picked up the dusty bottle. The liquid seemed to glow brighter as it swirled. You really want to try it? It's just that we don't get much call. Complimentary bar, right? Tom nodded. I'm not driving. Sure, I'll try a glass. Oh, you don't drink this in a glass. Gelsha pulled out a shot glass. A very small shot glass. And smiled as Tom dropped a 10-credit chip onto the table. Tom picked up the glass and examined the liquid critically. The muted luminescence was odd, but the oversized thimble of a glass didn't seem threatening, and he turned back to Aku. Anyway, you're right. You see, I have a girl about your age asking me for relationship advice. She's Shilvanti and he's human. They're about your age, and I have to admit, I'm getting a little stuck since I'm new to love, Shilvanti style. They're just dating, second date? Oh, she's a noble. Aku nodded in understanding. Has he brought her home to meet his mothers? Something like that? His older sister. I guess she's his family matriarch, so yes, more or less. If she's been properly raised and she does everything right, then around the third date she should ask him what he wants. If the boy wants to give it a try, then she'll start looking at plans with him. Making plans about her career to support him. That kind of thing. At least, that's how it should be. Aku seemed to shrink a bit, looking away and blushing. That's not how it worked with an arrangement like mine. It's not always been a good fit. Oh, sorry. I knew things got serious after the third date, but shaping your future that way seems... Well, thank you. I'll keep it under advisement when I talk to her. And at least that gives me something to go on. Tom lifted the shot. Cheers. In the dark of the night, Vadim looked at himself in the bathroom mirror dejectedly. He'd done his best, and the first girl he'd really had eyes for had treated him like he wasn't even there. That wasn't how it was supposed to go, and every part of him cried out at his reflection at the unfairness of the universe. Dad had tried to console him, and Vadim knew he was right, but all the same, it didn't banish the feelings. Not really. He knew it wasn't, but it still felt like the end of the world. He'd seen his friends around girls and thought of his dad. He knew that, without his father's charm and experience, it was that much easier to embarrass oneself, to get hurt more often, and to hesitate a lot. He knew, because although he didn't put himself out there, ever, he cared about other people's opinions. She was the only girl he'd lowered his defenses to attract. It wasn't like other girls hadn't tried to land him. He knew he was worth it, wasn't he? It didn't matter. The girl he wanted didn't want him. Aku had tried to warn him about Anther battle glory, but subtlety seemed to be lost on human men. At least that Tom fellow handled it better than most. Aku recalled the first time he tried a shot of that luminescent menace, awaking the next morning on top of the restaurant. How he'd managed to get away from his private army of sisters and scale a building in that condition remained a mystery. He lay back against a monstrous sack of cushions piled high in the center of his communal bed. Being the sole male of the group meant he had a full-size hotel room all to himself, and the solitude was welcome after the party. Social events amongst high society drained the body, spirit, and wallet, all with equal vigor. Tom had stopped slurring when he invited Aku to join his group for the rest of the night, which was undoubtedly spectacular. He couldn't remember the last time he'd had that much fun. The human tried to lead him and the other initiates in some old traditional Earth ballad called Volcano. Their attempts to sing a chorus in the human language caught the attention of Dendra, who was nice enough to sign autographs and pose for a few photos. Aku regretted not regaining his composure sooner. In the picture of him, Tom, and his wife standing with Dendra, his starstruck expression stuck out like an infected tusk. He quickly moved the photograph to the private folder. If Mistress Tranja saw it, who knew what she'd do to him? Make him shatter a dozen drinking glasses with only his voice? Or maybe he'd be forced to disassemble and reassemble his Zephyr 100 times. Such was the life of an initiate with an unforgiving mistress, but he wouldn't trade it for all the stars in the sky. The girls in the adjacent room were making quite a racket. He couldn't tell if they were fighting or playing. With women, the line between the two tended to blur. He strained to reach the dimmer switch on the wall without getting out of bed and grabbed his headphones. Time to see what this rock music was all about. Scrolling through the list, he realized now that Tom had sent him almost an entire library's worth of files. What in the Empress's name was an ABBA? Or an AHA? Bare Naked Ladies? He'd heard rumors about human pornography, but Tom didn't seem like the type who'd indulge. He attempted to type what he thought the word Freddy would look like in Shilvanti runes, and a sole album came up. Queen, The Platinum Collection, Greatest Hits 1, 2, and 3. The grey cover art was emblazoned with a coat of arms, as he'd expect one of the greater noble houses. This has got to be it. He couldn't read any of the song titles, so he opted to start with the first on the list. Linked to the song file was an accompanying video. Hopefully it wasn't just porn like the countless other videos that came from Earth. The image of 3 silhouetted figures in a mist-filled room appeared before him. Is this the real life? Is this just fantasy? Caught in a landslide, no escape from reality. Was it a singular voice? No, it couldn't be. It must be the same voice recorded a handful of separate times, then modulated and overlaid on top of each other. Overhead lights illuminated the 4 faces in frame. An instrument began to play. It sounded vaguely like an alien task tutora, but softer, more subdued. The voice, or voices, continued harmonizing up and down, until a lead voice broke through the sonic wall. The audio even shifted from ear to ear. Not entirely original, but a neatly executed acoustic trick, nevertheless. The video transitioned once more, displaying a group of 4 human men on a stage sporting big female hairstyles and dressed in flashy attire, which looked startlingly similar to his own uniform. The singer, this Freddy person, commanded the other performers with stirring passion and confidence, making full use of his range throughout. Too late. My time has come. Send shivers down my spine. Body's aching all the time. Goodbye, everybody. I've got to go. Got to leave you all behind and face the truth. The man sprang from his seat and released a cry unto the heavens, accompanied by percussion and electric string instruments. The colored stage lights reflected off his shimmering outfit, and he moved with unnatural grace just like his voice. The music built to a crescendo, the tension released by an electric zephyr solo. The tone of the instrument was completely unique, and it was glorious. Imagine his confusion when the music was abruptly reduced to the repeating striking of a solitary key. "Well, this is novel," he said aloud. I see a little silhouette of a man. Scaramouche, Scaramouche, will you do the fandango? Thunderbolts and lightning, very, very frightening me. What in the unholy offspring of the Deep Minder was going on? The brown-haired one hit an impressive falsetto before the video exploded into a kaleidoscope of sight and sound. They were singing opera now, with the lead voice calling out to a rebukeful choir, punctuated by the striking of alien instruments. Beelzebub has a devil put aside for me, for me, for me. It was like the crashing of a great wave. No, a tsunami of sound. Never before had he heard any musical arrangement that conveys such intensity. So you think you can stone me and spit in my eye? So you think you can love me and leave me to die? Cliff singers conducted themselves with poise and elegance. To earn the coveted title made you the living embodiment of 10 millennia of unbroken culture. It was a sacred trust, and the strict code of conduct passed down from generation to generation outlined every last mannerism you must possess without flaw. These humans took the book and threw it out of the airlock, if they'd even read it at all. Their cliff singers had complete, unrestricted freedom of speech, movement, and appearance. Not to mention that everyone on that stage was male. Aku took a vow that night. No matter how many sleepless nights of studying followed by groggy mornings it took, he'd learn that human language. The girls in the bunker were singing again. Special Agent Lamana Duvari sat in the isolation of her rooms, enjoying the late night air as she reviewed the surveillance video from inside the bunker. Pod 6 had started a week or so back, but it had caught on between the different shifts. Watching taped feeds of the objective over her movie night seemed to be popular, as well as video footage of the human at home, when he and Professor Pelavon were... Interior agents were not supposed to blush, and Lamarna banished the thought from her mind with a titanium force of will. While her commandos were watching the objective and the targets, Lamarna frequently needed to watch them. Isolation could do odd things over time, and any degradation in team efficiency would have to be dealt with sternly. When off duty, their regular pastimes of exercise, watching classes and movies, and playing games and puzzles had now been joined by singing. If anything, another avenue of recreation kept their focus, and after checking the feeds being monitored by each watch captain, she decided that while it was human, the music was harmless enough. Regardless, they only had 2 weeks left until the student show, and then there would be a blessed break, allowing a week out of the bunker over the holiday. Some of the music was catchy. Lamarna had to admit that much, and though Sergeant Diani couldn't carry a tune to save her soul, she'd taken to obsessively humming a song from one of the musicals the objective seemed to enjoy so much. There was still enough of a young musician lingering in Lamarna's heart for her to pull up the surveillance feed and watch the show herself, Les Misérables. The title itself proved only a minor mystery, as it was from one of the human subdialects. That was of little concern, as the story was told in the vernacular particular to Warwick's region. With the translator software already in place, the musical proved itself to be entertaining. There was only one bothersome aspect. She felt so very badly for the character of Javert. As best she understood it, the human was something of an interior agent, not so very different from herself. He was dedicated to upholding the law and put everything aside in the process. The song in his heart was as pure in intention as the vow of any agent as he cried out to be a weapon in the service of justice. Stars in your multitudes, scarce to be counted, filling the darkness with order and light. You are the sentinels, silent and sure. Javert's life resonated with her own. He seemed a person without vice, and like hers, it was a life of personal privation, respect for authority, and hatred of rebellion. But he was also a figure of self-denial and isolation. Am I so sure as that? Unlike Javert, she took her amusements and pleasures, even if it was as simple as watching the musical. Alone and second-hand, it was enough. Javert was a foil, a metaphor for making even the greatest of virtues into vices by taking them to unthinking extremes. The human was everything that an officer of the law ought to be, turned into a tragic caricature by his lack of reflection or doubt for the justice of his cause. She considered the lesson in that. Perfection was something to be reached for, but it was never something to put on display. It was wise to put on a display of harmless defects in order to deflect envy and notice. Perfection created enemies to no good purpose, and the occasional display of a feigned vice made her approachable. Only the goddesses and the dead can afford to seem perfect with impunity, she whispered. Reflective thought was never a wasted exercise, and mistakes were captured by rational doubts and eliminated, still born before they could blossom into realities. It wasn't a mistake she would make. Javert learned his lesson too late, preferring a suicide to a real solution. The world I have known is lost in shadow. Is he from heaven or from hell? And does he know they're granting me my life today? This man has killed me, even so. Suicide. As if that could rectify the mistakes he'd made. It was annoying. Merely an artistic flourish by the writer, banishing the character from the story rather than exploring the consequences of a lesson learned, a life reformed. Lamarna closed down the desk Omni after checking on the objective one more time. She and her friends were wandering back to the dorms from a beach party, and all was right in the world. She breathed a sigh of contentment on another day done. Today's mission accomplished. She took out her earbuds and set them to charge, before opening the window just a fraction more. The night air was chill, down to below 70, and she pulled the thick faux fur blanket about her shoulders before stepping onto the balcony and looking out towards the beach. She could see the bonfire still guttering off in the distance, as distant figures drifted back and forth between campus and the beach. One of those tiny specks would be the objective, enjoying a carefree time, or as carefree as she could, given the news of her sister-in-law. How do you commit a perfect murder? The thought chased itself through Lamarna's mind, as it often did. It was the sort of question that needed to be entertained. You had to consider the perfect murder if you were going to prevent the perfect murder. Someone had murdered Lady Aurelia. The story of suicide bandied about in the press was counter to all the reports crossing her desk. The palace knew it. As a part of her role with the Family Protection Detachment, Lamarna was seeing the message traffic. The truth was there to see in the FB dispatches. Aurelia had been no suicide. Lamarna didn't doubt that whoever had done the deed would be found. Javert was right in that. Justice needed care, but when properly tended to, justice was intractable. How do you commit a perfect murder? That was the question. Whatever came of it, she had already requested additional pods for the campus, was checking daily on the objective, had started running tighter checks on every procedure. However one committed a perfect murder, she wouldn't allow it to happen to her objective. I will not